Country Counselor here. Welcome again. Today we're going to talk about forgiveness. And forgiveness is a major issue. And I want to start with an opening statement. That's opinion. But I believe that unforgiveness will be the leading cause of death this year. And I believe it was last year and the year before and the year before. We know that unforgiveness actually breaks down our immune system. When that happens, it makes us susceptible to all kinds of sickness and disease. And I firmly believe that if everybody in the United States would forgive all their hurts, that we could probably eliminate 75% of the medical industry. And all we'd need a maternity ward and an ER for accidents and a section to take care of the elderly and those issues, and the rest of things would be very minor. And I think if as a result of forgiveness, that probably 75% of the folks that's in mental institutions could be set free and lead a normal life. Again, this is very important. And I hope you've been following in order. If you remember, our first session was on our rejection and how we were hurt, and I want you to see the progression of that, because hurt turns to anger, and anger never goes away until we deal with it, and that's why forgiveness is so important. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions about forgiveness. I hear a lot of times, "Oh yeah, I've forgiven," but I don't see the evidence of it. So I want us to start today with what is forgiveness? What does it mean? Well, I believe that forgiveness is a choice to make 4 promises. Okay? Promise number 1, I will not dwell on this instant any longer. Number 2, I will not talk to others about this incident. Number 3, I will not bring this incident up again and use it against you. And number 4, I will not let this issue interfere with our relationship any longer. Now, folks, that's tough. That's tough. But I'm very convinced that that is the very standard that God has set for himself. And I'm really glad about that, because God, when he forgives us, he said, I'll cast it as far as the east is from the west. He said, I'll forgive their sins and I'll remember it no more. And let's look at what he's saying and not saying in that. He's not saying that when our sin is forgiven, that it's removed from his memory and he has no recollection that it happened. That's not what he's saying at all. He still remembers. But what he's saying is, he's saying, I'm making these 4 promises to you. Once that I forgive you, I'll never bring it up to you again. I'll never use it against you. I will never let it interfere with our relationship in the future. I'll cast it as far as the east is from the west. And I strongly believe that is the very standard that God sets for us. And again, that's tough. That's tough. But it's also doable. God does not ask us to do anything that we cannot do. And so, a lot of times, we say we've forgiven, but the next time we have an argument, the next time we have a fight, this is brought back up. And that is not true forgiveness if you're not making those 4 promises. And we know that as Christians that love is a choice. It's about patience and kindness and goodness. We've learned that. It's not about a warm, fuzzy feeling, and it's the same with forgiveness. Forgiveness is a choice that we make, and we choose to do that, and we choose to make those decisions. Now, I want us to look at some different things today, but why is forgiveness so important? And there are a lot of reasons. First, God commands it. So are you going to say, well, is this just another commandment that God wants me to keep? Yeah, it is. It really is. Now, God has a motive in it. It's not that God's sitting up there and I've made these rules that you're going to follow. God's motivation is He knows how destructive that unforgiveness is, and how destructive it is. It's not just a spiritual issue. It affects us mentally and emotionally. And so that's God's motivation for us to give. And forgiveness and relationships go hand in hand. There can be no relationship with the Father unless we first receive the forgiveness from Jesus. And God is really big about forgiveness. And I said, I taught this not long ago, if God has a pet peeve, it's over forgiveness, because He watched His Son go through pain and agony beyond belief in order to forgive me and you. And when we see what Jesus went through to forgive it, and then we won't forgive our brother, or we won't forgive our husband, or our wife, or our neighbor, God has a problem with that, I think. And so it's very, very important that we do that. So forgiveness is foundational to an ongoing relationship. Now, I think another reason that forgiveness is such a big deal is that I believe that unforgiveness is one of the major blocks for us to receive healing. Again, God has major problems with it when we won't do that. And in my studies, when we're not willing to forgive others, it's a real block to our own healing. And God's very nature, again, is to bless. And the Bible's very clear that He wants us to have health, and He wants us to prosper and be in health. But this can block it for sure. And again, it's forgiveness can be so freeing, and again, it's very foundational to keeping a relationship as it should be. And we looked a few weeks ago when we did our concept of God, and we made a statement that nothing twists the soul more than a low or unworthy concept of God, and that's very, very true. But I think the same is true for forgiveness or for unforgiveness, that our unforgiveness begins to twist our soul, which was our mind and our will and emotions. And here's something else that's very, very important that I want you to see. I don't think that we can be free until we free others. Now, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 14, says that we must forgive others so that we can be forgiven. And in Mark chapter 25, or chapter 11, verse 25, makes the very same statement, that we must forgive others in order for us to be forgiven. Now, let's look at what I think God is saying and not saying. I don't think God is saying that if we don't forgive others, we can't go to heaven. I don't think He's saying that at all. But He's trying to show us how important this issue is. And we also know that God created some urgency on forgiveness. He said if you bring your gift to the altar and you remember you've got something against somebody, you leave your gift. I don't want it. He said, I want you to go take care of this problem that you have with this other person, and then you come back, and then I'll accept your gift. Again, He's creating some importance. He's creating urgency on that. And Ephesians says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. In other words, you deal with this quickly. But in Luke chapter 6, verse 37, this same statement shows up again. It said, forgive others so that you can be forgiven. And in the middle of the night, I couldn't get this statement off my mind, and I get up and I begin to study with my concordance. And again, when you read it, it's the word forgive and forgiven, the same word that was used in Matthew and Mark. But when I studied it, it had a different meaning. In Luke, the word forgive and forgiven was from a different Greek word than was used in Matthew and Mark. And listen to this, because this is really neat. It said to set at liberty. So let's read that verse again. Set others at liberty so that you can be set at liberty. Wow. That's the reason God stresses forgiveness so much. You can't be set at liberty. You cannot be free. And there's a multitude of things that goes on. One of the things, when we don't forgive others, we actually leave them partly in control of our life, because it dominates our thinking, and it dominates the way we think. And that, again, that's another reason that God stresses forgiveness. He wants His children to be set free, and you cannot be free unless you set others free. And so keep this in mind. Very, very, very important. Then another reason about forgiveness, we talked again in session 1. We've all had our rejecting experiences, and not just early in life. We had them through school and through marriages, and we've all been hurt. And that hurt turns to anger. And we are absolutely powerless to reach within ourselves and pull out hurt and anger. You cannot do it. There's only one that can. Only God can remove that hurt that's within you that actually turned to anger. But God cannot do that until you make the choice to forgive. And so I've taught forgiveness as a partnership. We do what only God can do, and then God does what only God can do. And God's always faithful to begin to do that. So it's very, very important. Again, it's a partnership. God wants you to be set at liberty. He wants you to be free, but you cannot be free if you hang on to unforgiveness. So on this session, I want you to think on these 4 things, the 4 promises. I will not dwell on it. I will not talk to others about it. I will not use it against you, and I will not let it interfere with our relationship. And it also, we can't be set at liberty till we set others at liberty, and anger never goes away until we deal with it. Now, I want to tell you 2 quick stories here before we quit, and they're personal stories. My dad was a good man. He was a pastor and had a great reputation. He was a good dad. Wasn't a perfect dad. And when my dad was about 73 years old, we were having a family get together, and it was either 4th of July or his birthday in August, and I don't remember which. But we're at my brother's house, and we're grilling hamburgers and making homemade ice cream. We're sitting outside, and you know how family get-togethers are. You've got a little group over here talking, a group over here, and I remember me and my dad, my sister-in-law, and there was somebody else there. But Dad was telling some old stories about growing up, and most of them were funny stories or interesting stories. And he gets onto this one story. And I know he told it for me. He didn't know that he was. But at this time, I had been through counseling training, and I'd studied anger and its effects. But anyway, here was the story. When my dad was 9 years old, his dad passed away. Now, that was in 1928. And it was in the rough part of the country. It was in the poor part of the country. And they didn't have food stamps and welfare in 1928. And if you got anything to eat, you had to get out and get it. And Dad had to go to work at 9 years old. The only job that my dad could find, there were some neighbors that were loggers, and they gave Dad a job. Now, they also didn't have a front end loader to pick those logs up. 4 men would pick those up. They had these hooks that would hook into a log on each end. They'd pick them up and carry them to where they could get to a wagon. And so I don't know what happened, but as Dad was telling that story, his lip began to quiver. And when Dad got upset, when Dad got angry, his lower lip would quiver. And I'm not here to tell you that God talks to me a lot, but God spoke to me and said, anger never goes away until it's dealt with. That happened to my dad when he was 9 years old. He was 73, and he was still angry over it. And I have to believe that Dad, realizing that, took care of that through forgiveness. But anger never goes away until it's dealt with. I have a brother that's a little older than I am, and he had a chiropractor, and he'd go to on occasion. And he goes to the chiropractor one day, and the chiropractor hits a spot, and my brother said, "Oh, that's sore." chiropractor said, "You've got some unforgiveness towards someone." My brother said, "Well, I don't reckon I do." And the chiropractor said, "Well, you do, and you need to deal with it." He just moves on. Well, my brother lived a good way from the chiropractor. He'd actually moved sometime after. But anyway, he's got an hour drive home, and he can't forget that. So he begins to pray. And my brother was, I think, 63, 64 at this time. And so can't get that off his mind. So he's going home, and he begins to pray, "Lord, if I've got some unforgiveness towards someone, I'll take care of it." So he begins to think through people, and when he was telling me the story, he said, "I thought about you, didn't have an issue with you." He gets to Mom, and God reminded him that when he was 16 years old, he got in Mom's face and he smarted her, and Mom slapped him in the face. The only time she ever did that. She never did slap me. I probably needed it, but had some on the backside. But anyway, but now there's two amazing parts to this story. That happened to my brother at 16. He's about 64. And his chiropractor, it shows up physically. Okay? That's amazing to me. But listen to this. My brother told me, he said, "I had not thought about that in 20 years. And that confirms what God spoke to me about with my dad. See, when you're hurt, that hurt stays within you. And it turns to anger. And we know that anger always surfaces in bad attitudes and bad reactions. You wonder why you have bad attitudes and bad reactions? It's probably from anger, from being hurt. And it can be from 20 years ago. In my dad's case, it was from 60 plus years ago. So don't think that the passage of time is going to take care of this. If you've been hurt, you've got to deal with it. So keep these lessons in mind. And we're going to talk further about this in our next session. So next time, God bless.